My name's James. I was 27 at the time this happened, and I'd been working for almost 2 weeks as a part-time night guard at a small resort sitting right on the edge of the beach. This wasn't some big or popular vacation spot. The place was pretty isolated, tucked away at the end of a narrow road that only certain vehicles ever used, mostly staff or guests who already had reservations. I got the job in a pretty informal way. The resort was owned by Linda, my former boss from an old job. She reached out to me directly and asked if I could fill in as a temporary night guard because her regular guy had to leave town to visit family. I was short on cash at the time, and I'd known Linda for years, so I agreed without really thinking twice. For almost 2 weeks, the job felt easy. Every hour I'd do a patrol, check that the empty villas were locked, inspect the gate, and keep an eye on the parking area. The resort rarely had guests during weekdays, so most nights were just me. The sound of the waves crashing in the distance, the ocean wind, and the garden lights glowing endlessly with no one around to notice them. That night started off no different than the others. The sky was pitch black, no moon at all. The air was damp, heavy with that salty beach smell. I started my shift around 11 p.m. and finished my first patrol without seeing anything out of the ordinary. But during the next patrol, sometime after midnight, I noticed something that absolutely should not have been there. At the far end of the parking lot near a line of coastal pine trees, there was a dark-colored car parked there. Its lights were off. From where I stood, it looked way too neat to be a car that was just randomly abandoned. I stopped walking and stared at it for a few seconds. I was sure that car hadn't been there when I started my shift. The resort had no guests that night, and all the villas were marked empty. I was the only staff member on duty. I tried to convince myself that maybe I'd just missed it earlier. Still, this uneasy feeling started creeping in. There was something about the way the car was positioned that felt deliberate, like it had been parked there on purpose, just out of clear view from the main entrance. I kept walking my patrol, but my mind wouldn't let go of that car. Every step felt slower than before, and the sound of the waves, usually calming, now felt heavy, repetitive, almost suffocating. When I passed through the parking lot again a few minutes later, the car was still there. This time I looked closer. The engine was running. No headlights, no interior lights, no music, no doors open. Just the low, steady hum of an idling engine sitting in the middle of a silent resort. My chest tightened. I stopped where I was and stared at the car from a distance, trying to make sense of it. The resort was supposed to be empty. There was no reason for anyone to be sitting in the parking lot at midnight with the engine on and the lights off. I decided to approach, not because I was brave, but because it was my responsibility. If someone was there, I needed to know why they were on resort property at that hour. My footsteps sounded way too loud on the gravel. With every step closer, I became more certain there was more than one person inside the car. I stopped a few meters away, and that's when I finally saw them clearly. 2 large men sitting perfectly still inside the dark vehicle, staring straight ahead like they'd known I was there the entire time. That was the moment I realized this night wasn't going to be like my previous shifts. I stayed a few meters from the car, keeping what I thought was a safe distance. The dim garden lights barely lit the parking lot, leaving most of their faces hidden in shadow. The engine was still running low and steady, cutting through the silence around us. I introduced myself as the resort's night guard and told them the area was supposed to be empty at this hour. My voice sounded calmer than I felt. One of the men slowly turned his head toward me, his face half covered by darkness. He said they were waiting for a friend. The answer was short, with no extra explanation. The man in the passenger seat kept staring straight ahead, not reacting at all. They didn't seem nervous. If anything, they were way too controlled. I nodded and took a step closer to get a better look at what was going on. From that angle, I could see into the car more clearly. The rear window was partially covered, but it was enough for me to notice something that sent a chill up the back of my neck. In the back of the car, there was a pile of thick blankets thrown together carelessly. Way more than two people would ever need. They looked heavy and uneven, like they were covering specific shapes underneath. It didn't match the rest of the car, which looked clean and brand new. I looked back at the two men. Almost at the same time, they opened the doors and stepped out. Both of them were big, broad shoulders, solid builds, and their movements were calm but calculated. One of them lit a cigarette. The other pulled out his phone and started typing fast, like he was trying to show he wasn't doing anything suspicious. I stayed where I was, not wanting to show the discomfort creeping into my head. I told them they weren't allowed to hang around the resort area without permission and asked again who exactly they were waiting for. The guy with the cigarette gave a small nod and said their friend would be there soon. His voice stayed flat. He smiled, but it was thin and never reached his eyes. As they stood near the car, my eyes drifted to the front of the vehicle without me meaning to. That's when I noticed a detail I'd missed before. There was no license plate, not on the front, not on the back, no identification at all. The paint still looked glossy, like it had just rolled out of a dealership, but the lack of plates made everything feel wrong. I kept my reaction to myself. If they realized I was suspicious, things could change fast. I pretended to check my watch and said I was going to continue my patrol, hoping they'd take the hint and leave. I walked away with slow, controlled steps, even though my heart was pounding hard in my chest. Once I was far enough, I slipped into the small security booth near the resort's main office. My hands were shaking a little as I opened the drawer and grabbed the small folding knife I usually used for work. I tucked it behind my jacket, hidden just in case. From the booth's window, I kept watching them. One of the men was still busy with his phone, occasionally glancing toward the main resort building. His eyes weren't scanning the area, he was focused on one specific direction. The longer I watched, the clearer it became that they weren't just waiting for a friend. Their body language was too focused, too patient, like they were waiting for the right moment. My gut told me their presence wasn't a coincidence, and that I might have just walked into a situation I was never meant to face alone. I stood there in the guard booth, staring at that car with no license plates, realizing that something much worse could happen before the night was over. And whatever those two men were planning, I was starting to feel like I, or someone who was supposed to come to the resort that night, had become part of it. I stayed inside the booth, standing instead of sitting, my body tense like I needed to be ready to move at any second. I turned off the light inside so I wouldn't be too visible from outside. Through the glass, I watched the two men now standing beside the car, their cigarettes glowing faintly in the darkness. The guy with the phone looked more and more restless. He kept checking the screen, reading something, then letting out long, frustrated sighs. The other man stood with his hands in his jacket pockets, staring straight at the main resort building, not toward the ocean, not toward the exit road. The way they acted made the feeling in my chest heavier. They didn't look lost, and they definitely didn't look like guys just killing time. They looked like people waiting for someone specific, and they knew exactly where to look. About half an hour later, my phone buzzed softly. A message came in from Linda. She said she wasn't coming to the resort that night after all. She was too exhausted after handling some business in the city and decided to get some rest. The message was short, but it was enough to make my chest tighten. The moment I lifted my eyes from my phone, I noticed something change about those two men. The guy holding the phone stopped what he was doing. He stared at the screen for a few seconds, then lowered it slowly, his face suddenly tense. He muttered something under his breath to the other guy. They looked at each other, and just like that, their expressions shifted, from relaxed to visibly frustrated. The driver slammed the car door when he got back into his seat. The engine turned over and revved loudly for a second, the sound tearing through the quiet beach air. But instead of pulling away, the car just sat there, idling for a few seconds like the driver was still debating something in his head. That was the moment when what I felt stopped being simple anxiety. It was pure fear, the kind of fear that hits you when you realize you're standing way too close to something dangerous. I didn't hesitate. I called the authorities and reported a vehicle with no license plates and 2 suspicious men inside a restricted area. Not long after I ended the call, the car finally moved. The tires let out a soft screech against the gravel as they drove out of the resort parking area and headed toward the main road, disappearing into the darkness of the trees. A few minutes later, officers arrived. They checked the parking area, reviewed the security camera footage, and listened carefully as I explained everything. From their initial findings, they learned the vehicle was using a fake VIN and was connected to a surveillance report involving a female business owner who owned several properties along the coast. One name stood out on that list: Linda. The officers believed the 2 men had been watching Linda for some time, learning her habits, knowing that she occasionally visited the resort alone at night. That night was supposed to be their opportunity. But their plan fell apart when Linda never showed up, and my presence as a temporary night guard meant they couldn't move freely. Even though the identities of the 2 men slowly began to surface, they were never caught. The vehicle vanished, and the case stalled at the investigation stage. The next morning, the regular guard returned from his hometown. I handed over my duties and chose not to continue working there. I didn't give a long explanation. I just said I wasn't cut out for night shifts anymore. Even now, there's one thought that still haunts me. If Linda had decided to come that night, something terrible might have happened to her. And if I hadn't been there as a last-minute replacement, there would have been no one to notice that unmarked car sitting quietly at the corner of the parking lot. My name is John. I was 29 years old when this happened, back when I was working the night shift at a small hotel near the Colorado mountains. The place was far from the city, surrounded by dense pine forests and narrow roads that only saw a handful of cars pass through each night. This wasn't a popular tourist spot, more like a temporary stop for hikers, hunters, or people who just wanted to stay away from crowds. That night was brutally cold. The mountain wind was howling, and the sound of trees rubbing against each other carried clearly through the air because there was almost no other noise. My shift ran from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Usually after midnight, the hotel would be completely dead quiet. No other staff. Just me. The security cameras only covered the front desk area, the main hallway, and the small parking lot. Around a little after 11 p.m., I was still sitting at the front desk, filling out the daily reports. The hallway lights were dimmed, leaving behind a dull yellow glow that stretched long shadows across the carpet. There weren't supposed to be any new guests that night. Every room had been booked since the afternoon. Then at exactly 11:30 p.m., I heard the front door open. A man stepped inside slowly. He was tall, wearing a dark, heavy jacket and a hat pulled low over part of his face. The way he walked was calm, too calm for someone who'd just come in from freezing mountain air. Instead of coming straight to the front desk, he stood near the entrance for a few seconds like he was taking in the room, or watching it. I greeted him professionally and asked for his ID. He gave a faint smile and said he wanted to rent a room for just one night. His voice was low and controlled. Throughout the entire conversation, his hands stayed tucked inside his jacket pockets. I checked the system and told him we still had one room available on the second floor. He nodded without saying much. When he handed over his ID, I noticed the address was from a state pretty far away, and it didn't match the license plate I'd seen on the car in the parking lot through the security monitor. He didn't look like a tourist or a hiker. No large bags, no gear. The only thing he carried was a small backpack that looked way too light for a long trip. After I handed him the room key, he didn't leave right away. He just stood there in front of the front desk, staring at the staff schedule posted on the wall behind me. His eyes moved slowly, scanning the names, the shifts, and then the empty spaces, clearly showing that I was the only one working that night. I felt this weird sense of discomfort. It wasn't full-on fear, more like a quiet instinct in the back of my head, constantly whispering that something was off. Eventually, the guy started walking toward the stairs, but he stopped on the very first step. He turned back to me and, in a casual tone, said the place felt really quiet. Perfect for someone who didn't want to be bothered. I just nodded and went back to my work. A few minutes later, I checked the parking lot cameras. His car wasn't parked properly, the headlights were still on, and the engine was still running. 5 minutes passed, then 10. No movement at all. It was like the car had been left there on purpose. Around midnight, the security system logged something strange. The back door had opened briefly and then closed again. That door was supposed to stay locked and could only be opened from the inside with a staff keycard. I leaned closer to the monitors, checking every angle. The cameras didn't show anyone. No alarms went off. No signs of forced entry. Everything looked normal, but that uneasy feeling in my chest only got stronger. That was when I realized this night wasn't going to be like any other shift I'd worked before. And that stranger wasn't just a normal guest. After the back door incident, I didn't rush into anything. Working at a remote hotel teaches you one thing fast. Panic usually makes things seem worse than they really are. I wrote down the time, double-checked the security panel, then grabbed the small flashlight I always carry and walked down the back hallway. The hallway was clean, no damage. The emergency door was shut tight, the lock still intact. Outside, the mountain wind was howling louder now, pressing against the hotel walls from every direction. I headed back to the front desk, not panicking, but definitely not feeling calm anymore. Around 1 in the morning, something started to feel off, not because of a noise or a shadow, but because of a pattern. The second-floor hallway camera kept catching the same guy standing still for way too long in certain spots. First near the ice machine, then at the end of the hall, then by the fire exit. He wasn't doing anything that technically broke the rules, but the way he moved felt deliberate, like he was mapping the place out in his head. What made it worse was how he kept slipping in and out of areas the cameras didn't fully cover. The hotel was old. There were blind spots, dead zones we all knew about. Usually that wasn't a problem. That night it felt very different. At around 1:20 a.m. he came down to the lobby. His face was calm, almost friendly. He asked if the coffee machine was still available. I told him it was and watched as he poured himself a cup, his eyes drifting toward the front door, then the staff hallway, then back to the front desk. He started making small talk. Said the hotel was way too quiet for a place to stay. Mentioned that I was alone tonight. His tone was casual, but every sentence felt like he was testing me, waiting to see how I'd react. I kept my answer short and neutral. After he walked away, something hit me. I never told him I was working alone. A few minutes later, the hotel phone rang. A call from a room on the second floor. It was his voice again, asking for extra towels. A normal request. Nothing strange on its own. But when I checked the hallway camera before heading up, he wasn't in his room. He was standing by the emergency stairs, right in the darkest corner of the floor. I didn't go upstairs. I left the towels on the front desk and told him over the phone that he could come down and grab them himself. Seconds after the call ended, another camera picked up movement in the parking lot. Not one car, two. Their headlights shut off almost at the same time. No doors slammed. No one immediately walked toward the entrance. The cars were parked farther away near the trees where the lot was partially hidden. That's when I realized he hadn't come alone. The feeling of being watched turned into certainty. Every move I made felt anticipated. I didn't see anyone else on the screens, but I knew people were there waiting for the right moment. They weren't in a rush. They were patient. Around 2 a.m, the strange guy showed up in the lobby again. This time he stood closer than before. The smile was still there, but his eyes were cold, focused. He said he'd forgotten his wallet in his car and might step outside for a minute. As soon as the front door shut behind him, I turned to the parking lot monitor. There were 3 figures standing near the car now. They weren't talking. They were just standing there, staring straight at the hotel. I locked the lobby door from the inside and grabbed my phone. My hands started to shake a little as one disturbing thought hit me. They didn't look like guests trying to check in. They looked like people waiting for a signal. And I knew the night was far from over. After locking the lobby, I stood behind the front desk for a few seconds, staring at the security monitors. The 3 men in the parking lot hadn't moved. None of them tried to come inside. None of them appeared to be talking. They stood there like people who were used to waiting. I didn't turn off the lobby lights. I knew darkness would only make things worse. I didn't yell or make any sudden noise either. I called the local emergency number from the hotel phone and explained the situation as clearly as I could without sounding panicked. I gave them the hotel's location, told them how many people I could see, and made it clear that I was working alone. The dispatcher told me to stay somewhere safe and not open any doors. A few minutes later, one of them walked up to the main entrance. It was the same guy who'd checked in earlier, standing out front. He didn't knock. He just stood close enough that I could clearly see his face through the glass. His expression was blank, not angry, not rushed, just calm, like he was sure that door would eventually open. He raised his hand and held up the room key card I'd given him earlier. Speaking through the glass, he said he just wanted to come in and grab his stuff. There was no threat in his voice, but there was no request either. I didn't respond. He stepped back and motioned to the other 2 men. One of them walked around the side of the building. The side camera caught him stopping near the back door, the same door that had mysteriously been left unlocked earlier that night. That's when everything finally clicked for me. They weren't trying to scare anyone. They were testing the system, watching how fast we reacted, mapping out responses, waiting for a weak spot. I stayed on the phone with the dispatcher while keeping my eyes glued to the security monitors. One of the men walked back to the car and pulled something out of the trunk. The cameras didn't give a clear view, but the way he held it told me it wasn't anything harmless. A few minutes later, I heard sirens in the distance. Not close, but close enough to change the mood. The guy standing at the front door turned his head toward the main road. For the first time, his expression changed. That calm smile vanished. They moved fast. Way too fast to look like people who just happened to be there. 2 of them rushed back to the car, while the one who had checked in tried the back door. The emergency alarm finally went off, slicing through the quiet mountain air. Moments later, police cars rolled into the parking lot. Red and blue lights washed over the hotel walls. All 3 men tried to run, but the tight parking area and narrow mountain road didn't give them many options. I watched them get taken down from behind the lobby window. Once the officers secured the area, they came inside. From what I overheard, the 3 of them were part of a robbery crew that had been hitting remote lodges and small hotels. Their method was simple. One guy would check in and watch the place, make sure the night staff was alone, then signal the other 2 to move in and grab cash and valuables before sunrise. One of the officers told me the hotel was already flagged as a high-risk location, but extra security hadn't been assigned yet. I wasn't even supposed to be working alone that night. Another staff member had called out last minute, and the schedule change never made it into the central system. The night ended just before dawn. Light snow started falling as I signed the report. The hotel went quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet, not the peaceful kind. Ever since that night, I've never looked at the night shift as an easy job again. My name's Mac. I'm 30 years old, and this happened during a single night shift that was supposed to be completely routine. At the time, I was working as a temporary guard at an old lighthouse perched on the edge of a rocky cliff, far from any kind of civilization. There were no houses nearby, no shops, nothing. Once the sun went down, my phone signal usually disappeared completely. The only way to reach the lighthouse was a narrow, winding road with a steep drop on one side and a solid rock wall on the other. The lighthouse itself was tall and cylindrical, built from thick concrete that had clearly seen better days. Inside, there was a metal spiral staircase connecting the lower level, the control room, and the main light at the top. Every single step echoed with a hollow metallic clang, the kind of sound that constantly reminds you that you're completely alone in the building. My night shift started around 8 p.m. All I had to do was make sure the main light stayed on, monitor the emergency radio, and log the weather and any sea traffic. That night, the ocean was calm, the wind steady, and the sky was clear with no signs of a storm. Nights like that were usually boring. Most guards would just read a book or kill time waiting for morning. The first few hours went by normally. The lighthouse beam rotated at its usual pace, sweeping across the dark surface of the sea. Far below, the sound of waves crashing against the rocks was constant and oddly soothing. No radio calls, no suspicious ships, nothing out of the ordinary. About an hour into being completely alone with the silence, I noticed something through the small window in the control room. Outside the safety fence, in an area that was usually empty and pitch black, I saw a figure standing still. It was pretty far away, but it was definitely not a shadow or some trick of the light. There was someone there. At first, I told myself it might be a Coast Guard worker or a fisherman who'd gotten lost. But the longer I watched, the stranger it felt. The figure wasn't moving. No flashlight, no signs of confusion or panic. They were just standing there, facing the lighthouse, facing the exact window I was standing at. I went downstairs to get a better look from the exterior door. When I peeked through the reinforced glass, the figure had changed position. They were closer now, close enough that part of their body was lit by the exterior light. They stood upright, completely still, way too calm for someone alone in a place this isolated, in the middle of the night. There were no scheduled visits, and I hadn't received any notice from anyone. That uneasy feeling started to creep in, slow but unavoidable. I stayed behind the door, not opening it, just watching. The figure then began to move along the side of the building, their steps slow and deliberate, like they were inspecting the lighthouse or looking for a way in. That was when I realized something that made my chest feel heavier. This guy wasn't acting like someone who was lost or needed help. His movements were deliberate, calculated. And when he stopped right beneath the lower floor window, I got this bad feeling I couldn't explain. I stayed behind the metal door, watching him through the small, cloudy window. The man was clearer now, standing directly under the outdoor light. He was thin, his shoulders slightly hunched, wearing a dark jacket that looked a size too big. His pants were worn and dirty, and the beanie pulled down over his head made it hard to read his face. Slowly, he looked up, straight toward the window. His eyes didn't show panic or confusion. If anything, they looked empty and focused, like he already knew I was inside and was just waiting to see what I'd do. I didn't open the door. I just called out, saying the lighthouse wasn't open to visitors and that whoever was outside needed to leave. No response. The man started moving again, calmly circling the building. From inside, I could hear his shoes crunching against gravel and concrete. Every step sounded loud in the silence, with nothing but the ocean wind in the background. I followed his movement through the small side window, trying to make sure he was actually leaving. But he wasn't heading toward the exit. He stopped on the side of the lighthouse that isn't visible from the main door. A few seconds later, I heard the sound of metal being touched, like a hand sliding along a safety railing. The back of my neck tightened instantly. That area isn't a walkway, and there's no reason for anyone to be there unless they're trying to get closer to the building. I went back into the control room and checked the emergency radio, making sure the frequency was active. Everything looked normal. The indicator lights were steady, no signal interference. I tried to calm myself down, telling myself I was still safe as long as the door stayed locked. A few minutes passed in a silence that felt way too heavy. Then I heard footsteps on the outside stairs. They weren't rushed. They were slow, heavy, deliberate, one step at a time, moving closer to the main door. The distance closed with each step, and every sound felt like pressure building in my chest. The man was standing right outside the door now. From the other side, I could hear him breathing. Short, uneven, like someone trying hard to keep their emotions in check. He didn't knock. He didn't call out. He just stood there way too close, like he wanted me to know without a doubt that he was there. Then he spoke. His voice was low and rough, almost flat, with no real emotion in it. He said my name, clearly, no hesitation, no mistake. He said my full name like it was nothing, like we'd met before. My body went cold. There was no reason a stranger should know my name, especially not out here in a place this isolated. I didn't answer. I took a few steps back, putting distance between myself and the door, forcing my breathing to slow down. The door handle moved slowly. Not yanked, not forced, just tested, like he was calmly checking whether it was locked. The soft clink of metal echoed in the silence, loud enough to make my stomach drop. That's when I realized what made this fear feel different. The man outside wasn't acting randomly. He knew exactly what he was doing. He knew I was alone. And he knew that in a place like this, no one was coming if something went wrong. Above me, the lighthouse beam kept rotating, sweeping its light out over the ocean like nothing was happening at all, like it didn't care. Meanwhile, I stood frozen inside, suddenly aware that this encounter hadn't even reached its worst point yet. Whatever he did next was going to turn this from a strange situation into something far more real. And at that moment, I had no idea how far he was willing to go. The door handle moved again, this time without hesitation. He pulled harder, followed by a sharp jolt that made the entire door shake. The metallic rattle echoed through the building, traveling up the spiral staircase and into the upper levels. I stepped back on instinct, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it was filling my head. Then he started pushing on the door, over and over, not frantically, but with steady, deliberate pressure. Every shove hit the exact same spot, like he'd already figured out where the door was weakest. He didn't yell. He didn't threaten me. And somehow the silence between each impact made it so much worse. I immediately locked the inner security door and hurried up to the control room. The metal stairs creaked under my feet, and for the first time I found myself hoping the sound of my footsteps couldn't be heard from below. From up there I could hear the man shifting around. He wasn't panicking. He tried the side window, slamming his shoulder into it, then went back to the main door, hitting it even harder than before. My hands were shaking as I switched on the emergency radio. My own voice sounded strange in my ears as I reported the situation and asked for help as fast as possible. Every second dragged on, like time itself had slowed down just to stretch out the fear. Outside, the man started talking to himself. His words were unclear, broken up, like fragments of unfinished sentences. He muttered about guard shifts, about the light needing to stay on, about people who weren't supposed to be inside. From the tone of his voice, I realized he didn't just want to get in. He genuinely believed he had a right to be there. Another heavy impact hit the door. This time it shook hard enough that fine dust fell from the ceiling. What I felt then was pure fear, the kind that makes your body feel light and heavy at the same time. All I could do was wait, listen, and hope the door would hold. Eventually, headlights swept across the outside of the lighthouse. A few minutes later, I heard different footsteps followed by firm commands from outside. The man stopped hitting the door. There was no struggle. When the police and Coast Guard officers secured him, his body looked limp, like all the energy had drained out of him at once. Once everything was under control, I finally went back downstairs. Up close, I could see his face clearly. His eyes were red and empty, and his expression wasn't angry. It was deeply confused. The police explained that he had worked on a lighthouse repair project years ago. He'd been fired after showing unstable behavior. Since then, he'd kept coming back, convinced the lighthouse was still his responsibility. He had untreated mental health issues. In his mind, I wasn't the keeper. I was an intruder who had taken over a place he still believed belonged to him. That night ended without anyone getting hurt. The incident didn't carry over into the next day. After the reports were finished and the police left, the lighthouse fell silent again, like nothing had ever happened. The light at the top kept rotating, faithfully doing its job, and that one night shift at the lighthouse was enough to make me never see silence as something safe ever again.